This time on Poll Hub, the politics of the Supreme Court in the final weeks of a presidential election. If you thought partisan differences were already at an all-time high, think again. We will look at new polls on the battle. Then, speaking of new polls, as we've said many times before on Poll Hub, doing quality polling is more difficult by the day. But many in the industry are working overtime this season to get it right. We've got fellow pollster Patrick Murray from the Monmouth Poll on to discuss what's going on and what we're all working on to make sure that 2020 is as accurate as it can be. So, let's get to it. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm Jay DeDapper, Director of Innovation here at the Marist Poll.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho, Director of the Marist Poll.
And I'm Mary Griffith, Media Director for the Marist Poll, sitting in for Lee Miringoff today.
And you're doing a wonderful job.
So far, yeah, good start.
Let's see in about 20 minutes.
So this has been a year with so many twists and turns and surprises that I think a lot of people thought, well, that we've had plenty of those. Let's just see where we get with the election. And then on Friday night, out came the news that Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a Supreme Court justice, had died. And there's a lot of sadness in that. Very respected jurist. There have been a lot of people talking about what she did as a justice, as a woman, in her history. But there's also a political aspect to this that we can't ignore. And that came about almost immediately after the announcement of her death, when there were, within minutes, people on both sides of the aisle talking about whether this would be a rush to appoint her replacement by the Republicans and Donald Trump, and what Democrats would do if that tried to happen. So before we talk about that, I just want to say that we really do need to honor her as a person and as a jurist, and take a breath, and then talk about the politics. So let's talk about the politics. Where are we with this?
Well, it's as you said, Jay, it didn't take very long for everybody to start politicizing her death and the fact that there is now an open seat on the Supreme Court. She certainly was an amazing woman with an amazing career. I should just say an amazing person, because even to define her as one gender does not do her justice. But again, this is a very polarizing time. People have equated this election with being so consequential that we haven't had one since 1860 that was more so, because the country is so incredibly divided. So as soon as this happened, obviously everyone reflected upon her career, but the big issue is now what happens. And Democrats certainly were reflecting back to the last year of the Obama administration, when the majority leader decided that the Republicans would not hear a nominee or have any hearings for President Obama's nominee of Merrick Garland. And but we still have that Senate, and that Senate, despite the fact that many of those members had said that, and particularly Lindsey Graham has said that they would not move forward, they have decided to do that, so that once the memorials for Justice Ginsburg have passed, Trump has said that he will pick a Supreme Court nominee. But what we do is we, go to the polls and we go to public opinion. And there have been quite a number of them just this week. Mary, did you want to kind of weigh in here a little bit on some of the polls that were out, and some of the things that they did show?
Sure. Well, there was a Fox News poll that came out about a week, maybe a little bit more than a week or so ago, that showed that among likely voters, they trust Biden over Trump in terms of nominating the next Supreme Court justice, 52% to 45%. And I believe it was also a CNN poll that shows that 79% of Democrats, registered voters who are Democrats, rate the Supreme Court as extremely or very important in their vote. And along the same line, 71% of Republicans said that the High Court, was extremely or very important to their vote as well. And, that's just something that I wanted to throw out there as well. When we're talking about the environment that we're living in politically, from our own polling, what we've seen is that the Supreme Court is trusted among Americans. But when we look at other institutions like Congress, like the presidency, there's very low confidence and low trust in these American institutions. And, that's just a question that I've been thinking about is when we talk about all this infighting in terms of appointing a new justice to the Supreme Court or nominating a justice to the Supreme Court, how is that going to play out moving forward in terms of the broader polarization in the country?
It's hard to see how that helps, right, Barbara? I mean, we've talked about partisanship on, I think, every episode of Poll Hub in one way or another, probably since we began this podcast 2.5 years ago. So it's hard to see how this helps, right?
Well, one thing that is interesting is that there was a consensus even, back, when Merrick Garland was the issue in 2016, that Americans really felt that things should move forward. This time, I think we have some consensus also about the fact that there should be a pause until the election. Now, what happens after the election, I think that there is probably some disagreement, but there is some consensus there that this shouldn't become the political, football that defines the election, even though that's likely where it's headed. One of the things that I thought was really interesting, because there were a number of polls out that actually looked at the states. New York Times, Siena probably, I believe, was in the field, and they immediately took a look at, who is trusted, Mary, what you were talking about, who's trusted really to pick the next justice. But what I find particularly interesting about that is, as you go state by state, asking that question is almost like asking the matchup between Trump and Biden. If it's a state that Biden is likely to be ahead in, then more people trust him to do so, and vice versa. So it has become incredibly politicized. It's likely to continue to be so, and perhaps be one of those defining moments in the electorate. The Republicans clearly think that this is going to energize their base, and certainly given that we are seeing that turnout seems to be very, very high this time. It's actually hard to find people who are saying that they are not likely to participate. There's been significant push to register voters on both sides, both Republican and Democrat, and some outnumbering the others depending upon the state. So this is an incredibly energized electorate. It's a polarized electorate, and it seems like it's just becoming more so.
That's the question I have, is in a purely political way. There's been so much analysis in a very short period of time about why the Republicans would push to move this forward as quickly as possible, and lots of armchair quarterbacking on that. But what we know from 2016 is that the Supreme Court nomination, the holding back Garland, and the chance for conservatives to elect a president who could replace a liberal justice with a conservative justice was a motivating factor for more Republicans, more Trump voters than it was Democrats or Democratic voters.
Very true. Yes, very true.
There's limited polling right now on this because this just happened. So the polling that we have that we're talking about is very limited. Some of the polls we talked about, actually, those questions were asked before she passed. What happens this time, though? Are Democrats this time more motivated or as motivated as Republicans because they saw what happened in 2016? I think that's a wild card. I'm not sure the polls, do you see in this data anything that indicates to you that is the case? That Democrats are more motivated?
I think that this time around, Democrats are certainly at least as motivated. And I think the fact that this has become so politicized, and when the nomination is going to be made, and when the hearings are going to be held and the seat filled, I think becomes a very different issue and a different case than what we have had in the past. And so there you do see the consensus, people really wanting to move this past election day, except, and it's a big exception, it is for that 30% of Americans, mostly Republican, who very strongly support Trump.
And now we'd like to welcome to the podcast Patrick Murray. Patrick is the director of the Polling Institute at Monmouth University. Welcome, Patrick.
Hey, it's good to be back with all of you again.
It's great to have you here. So we want to start off by talking about Monmouth's latest battleground state polls. And I know that you have a brand new Georgia poll out today. So why don't you share with us a little bit about what you found, the highlights?
Yeah, it's interesting. We're not finding a lot of movement, and this really shouldn't be a surprise to anybody that the movements that we're seeing in any of these polls are small. We've been talking about how public opinion of Donald Trump has been written in stone since he took office, basically, with some small movements here and there. So, it's a tight race in Georgia. Our poll has Donald Trump up by a couple points, depending on how you look at likely voters. We actually have in the Senate race, and these are key. This is why one of the reasons why I'm polling Georgia and some other states is because the Senate races are really important. And of course, there's 2 in Georgia. So we have Purdue up by a few points there. I know some other polls have it closer. And this is a state that's going to be really interesting because I've polled Georgia in the past, and I've had Democrats complain to me that their candidate I was undersampling. We all get this one. You've undersampled this group. No, we sampled the group correctly. You must just not like, how many people in your
guys
internal right in your internal models. You might goose the number for your demographics a little bit, but Georgia is always interesting because it's one of those states where, because of the problems that they've always had with voting in urban areas and turnout issues and people waiting in long lines, that turnout models have always been hard to do, and certainly this year is going to be worse than ever in Georgia. But the race that I find most interesting is that special Senate election.
Tell us not only about some of our listeners will be our students as well. So give us a little bit of background on the Georgia Senate and why they've got two races this time.
All right. So they have a regularly scheduled race. That's Dave Perdue's seat. So that was already going to be up on the ballot. But Johnny Isakson, the other senator, resigned a year ago. He was replaced by a gubernatorial appointment, a woman named Kelly.
And
Loffa.
I think we probably read a little bit about that.
Yes, and it's interesting because
Trump is not a fan of hers.
Not a fan. He's actually said some nice things about it, but it's been clear that he actually wanted Congressman Doug Collins, to actually have been the one who was appointed to this seat. But what's happened is there was still a little over 2 years left on Isakson's term, which means you have to have a special election to fill the remainder of that term, even though somebody had been appointed. But Georgia has this incredibly interesting rule, which is if it's a special election, then it's an open primary where everybody runs on one ballot, regardless of what party you're in. So there's Democrats. I think there's 5 Republicans, 6 Democrats, or 6 Republicans.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you could add them up because I have.
Yeah, there's 20. There's 20 on the ballot. That one I remember. So there's like 10 or there's 11 of the Democrats and Republicans. There's a Libertarian, a Green, a Constitutional Party probably, and a couple of independents who are on there as well. So we're polling the top, what we consider that have been likely to be the top 6 candidates, which include 2 Republicans, 3 Democrats, and the Libertarian. And the reason how did we determine that? That's one of those key questions when you're polling a race with 20 people in it. How do you determine how many you're going to name? As we found in our presidential.
I was just about to say we
decided we named pretty much everybody,
yep.
right? Right, but and found that worked. But in a general election, it's a little more difficult to do. One of the things that we looked at was the FEC filings. So the financial filings. If you've got a certain amount of money in the bank, if I forget what number we picked, it was like 250,000 or something that you've raised, then you made it into the ballot test for us. But What's interesting about this is that if no candidate gets 50% of the vote, then there's a runoff in January between the top two candidates. Now, in our polling in July, it looked like the top two candidates were going to be two Republicans, Kelly Loeffler and Doug Collins, two that we were just talking about. But in our latest poll, and part of the problem was that the Democrats hadn't really consolidated around any single candidate, so they kind of were split. In our latest poll, it looks like the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, Ralph Warnock, is starting to consolidate the support. Now, he's moved into a three-way tie with Collins and Warnock, but that means it could be a Democrat and a Republican going up there's no question there's going to be a runoff in January. Nobody's getting 50% plus one. But will it be Loeffler and Collins? Will it be Collins and Warnock? Will it be Warnock and Loeffler? It's unlikely to be Matt Lieberman, the son of former Senator Joe Lieberman, who has gotten into a little bit of trouble with a book that he published that had some racial tropes in it that weren't popular, but he hasn't actually lost a lot of support. It's more that the undecided Democratic vote has been swinging to Warnock's side. So that's going to be interesting. That's why we're following that. There's been a call for Lieberman to drop out of the race. He can't get off the ballot at this point, but at least to drop out and throw support.
So you guys are doing a lot of state polls. We're doing them. We have two A+ pollsters, according to Nate Silver here. So this is a good club that we're in. But state polls are really, people are paying, I think, more attention this time because of what happened in 2016, where the state polls kind of missed, national polls got it. What are you guys doing to try and ensure that your state polls are accurate? Because we've talked on this show a lot about how hard it is to poll. We bellyache about it a lot because of the costs, because of reaching cell phone, all of this stuff. And so our listeners know that it's hard to do. What are you doing to try and make this work in 2020?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I'm doing this time there's two things that's different, and one that you know about. It's something that we're doing that you're not doing. So we use registered voter lists. Mm-hmm. Right. To do that, and you don't, right? So, and that's fine, because I actually think that's actually a great thing, because it helps us have a little bit more understanding and confidence in the range of possibilities when you're using slightly different methodologies there, both of which have their pros and cons. We are using the education weight. I'm sorry. Whereas you are not, to just
we use it when necessary, but what we've found is with our changes to pay attention to geography, we've actually come in pretty close to what everybody has to balance to.
Right, because the balance is, we don't know what the exact parameter is of college educator, right? So we are making estimates of what that parameter is based on our best.
And the past always helps, but obviously it's not always the future is not how we remember it.
Right, it's true. But even the census, which is the key marker that we're going to, if you look at the ACS, the American Community Survey, and then you look at the CPS, the Current Population Study, they have different estimates but differ by about 10 points in terms of the college education of the adult population in those states. So we have to kind of make an estimate there. But what you were saying about geography, that's really important, which is that if you have a really good geography segmentation, and you're looking at not only just the geographic distribution of the state, but also the partisan strength in each of those geographies as well, is that if you do that right, you're going to get your education weight, you're going to get your education demographic much closer to reality, and probably close enough that it's not going to throw off your top line number. That was the key. You don't have to have education the weight perfect, but you need to be within 10 points of college education, right? In order for your top line estimate not to be off. And I think that's one of the things that where we're coming in from different ways and arriving at pretty much the same thing. But the other thing that I'm doing differently now is I am actually going to continue to do all registered voters, and I'm doing more a probabilistic weight rather than a cutoff weight on our likely voters, and I'm giving multiple likely voter models rather than just one. Hey, this is our best guess at likely voters. I'm going to say this is the range of possibilities, starting from the registered voters and going to likely voters. And that, I think, and I started doing that in 2018, and I think I do that mainly because not just to hedge my bets.
Although it's really it doesn't hurt.
It's a good hedge.
It doesn't hurt. You got to have
But
the
it's
number
right.
in there somewhere, Patrick.
Yeah, you're going to be correct within the range.
Kind of
you
like
know?
the
Yeah, and actually,
forecasters, you know, if they're going to have a probability that's so wide, they can just say, well, yeah, so it was only a 5% chance, but it happened. We were, you know, we got
But
it.
yours
we
is much
found-
narrower. Yours is much
Yeah,
narrower.
yeah, it's not an hour. Yeah, we've seen ones that have like 10 or 15 point difference because they're just arbitrarily throwing in and pulling
No,
out different things in the
yours
model.
is
I'm
serious.
actually
No, I
trying to
know
make
it's a
realistic
serious effort.
models.
Absolutely.
Right. And in 2018, we actually did that. We had two different models based on two different types of turnout, whether there was surges of Democratic voters in Democratic areas or not. And that was based on the 2017 gubernatorial races in Virginia and New Jersey, plus the special elections that occurred. They were both based on very real historical turnout models. And we found that one of the models or the other generally matched the outcome based on what we said the model was going to do,
Right.
who was going to turn out. So we're trying to do the same thing here, but also conveying the level of uncertainty to the public is important because, as we keep trying to say to folks, polls are a snapshot. They don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And there's also a level of uncertainty. As good as polls can be, there's always going to be a level of uncertainty, and we need to be able to convey
So
that.
also, our sample sizes differ, pretty significantly too.
Yep.
So, one of the things is, well, so why do we have to poll so many people, and why don't you need to poll as many people?
Yeah, I found that having done both RDD and a list-based sample, that because you can control for a lot of those geographic variables and a couple of other things, voter registration, a whole bunch of other things, is that I found that we can basically save some money and do smaller samples. But when you're doing RDD, I think it has to do a larger sample to make sure that you're capturing all those other things that you can't pre-control as you can with a list sample.
What do you worry at all about the fact that there is a lack of coverage? I mean, I think there was a poll out by the Cook Political Report and the Kaiser Foundation recently, where they did use registered-based sample, but they looked at address-based. Contacting people through addresses as opposed to just the telephone, since there are so few matches.
Mm-hmm.
When we look at registered-based sampling. Do you worry about that?
No, because it has actually improved. We are now getting
or depends on the state.
It does depend on the state. It does depend on the list vendor. But we're now getting 65-75% of active voters in many of our states, which we've been comfortable with in terms of the coverage level.
When you look at the states that you're in, the states that we've all been in, we talked a little bit about Georgia and it's tricky. Is there a state that you kind of wish wasn't a battleground that we didn't have to be in?
Right now, I would say Florida and Iowa.
Always Florida.
Don't really bother me, but always Florida.
Yeah.
Florida's
I second.
I almost did not poll Florida.
I second Florida. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
It is so hard.
Well, that's always a hotly contested state, and will be again this time. Well, thank you very, very much, Patrick. We really appreciate you coming on, especially since it's such a busy day.
Yeah, anytime.
But we'll be watching and following as well, and good luck.
Thanks. You too.
That will do it for this edition of Poll Hub. Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York, though we are recording this podcast remotely today. I'm Mary Griffith, is Poll Hub's executive producer, and Casey Schaff is our editor. Our trusted production assistants are Amelia Morell, Leo Ruiz, Maddie Jones, and Marcello Bettman.
Takes a village to get Poll Hub on nowadays, huh? Thanks to and here's another part of the village. The Roper Center Archive at Cornell University helps provide us with the ability to look back at survey questions and results over the decades, and we do that in almost every show. If you have comments or questions, reach out to us on social media. We're at Marist Poll on Twitter, Marist Poll on Facebook and Instagram. We'd like to hear from you.
So if you want to find out more about all the geeky stuff that we were talking about today, head over to our online learning platform, the Marist Poll Academy. It's visual, it's free, and can be very engaging and interesting. And finally, if you like what you hear on Poll Hub, please consider leaving a review on your podcasting app of choice. We love positive reviews, but actually we do like all kinds of comments. But your positive reviews will help others find us, and while you're at it, go ahead and subscribe. Thanks for listening today, and be safe.